some of the big questions. One may be why this pattern exists. You see, that pattern is like a periodic table. So if you go back to the 19th century, Mendeleev's periodic table, where you could arrange the chemical elements together into a pattern, it told you, it was the key to understanding the underlying structure of atoms, right? In a sense, the underlying laws that govern the way that matter behaves. There's clearly a pattern there. It's a beautiful pattern, but we don't understand it. So one of the things the LHC may well do is shed some light on what that pattern is. But there's one thing that it will definitely do, and I don't need to tell you, I can just show you the equation. You see, we haven't only stamp collected, we haven't only found these particles. Ernest Rutherford once very famously said that all science is either physics or stamp collecting, by which he meant that he got the Nobel Prize for chemistry, I should add. But what he meant was that really discovering things becomes science when you start to make models and you start to understand in some precise way what the data is, what you've observed. This is called the Standard Model of Particle Physics, and it describes with absolutely astonishing precision everything we know about the universe other than gravity. So it describes everything about all the particles in that picture there. It describes how electromagnetism works, it describes how nuclear physics works. I suppose in principle, if you get a powerful enough computer, this should describe things like the structure of DNA and the way that proteins work. Everything that we know about the underlying physics of matter is in that very simple, and it is simple if you think about it in those terms, those 4 lines of the equation. However, these 2 bottom lines contain something that isn't in there. And they're in there to make the mathematics work. Right? They've been in there since the 1960s, because without them, this mathematics does not describe what we know about matter. But this thing here, this one symbol, represents another particle, a new particle that is not in there. And it's called the Higgs particle, that many of you may have heard of. Its job is to give mass to the other particles. So we know that particles have mass. Right. We know that our hand has mass, we know that electrons and the particles inside the nucleus, the quarks, have mass, but we don't know exactly what the mechanism is that gives them mass. Without putting that into the standard model, it completely fails. In fact, it can't predict anything above a certain energy at LHC, which is one of the reasons the LHC is as big as it is, because it makes collisions that go beyond our current understanding without at least this thing called the Higgs particle. How does it work? Well, it just fills the universe with something called the Higgs field. This is how the model works. This is a beautiful analogy, actually, which was developed in the 1980s in response to a request from Margaret Thatcher's government for particle physicists to explain to them on one sheet of A4 in language even a politician, even a conservative politician, you're talking about Michael Portillo, you're talking about climate change, even Michael Portillo is talking about climate change, can understand. If the competition was, if we could explain it, this is what they said to us, and they understood it, then they would give us the money to carry on participating at CERN and build the Large Hadron Collider. This is the explanation that convinced them to carry on funding CERN, convinced Margaret Thatcher to do it. The Higgs field does behave like this. It's as though you had this room full of particles, represented here by Conservative Party attendees at a Conservative Party conference, all milling around. Then you imagine someone who's not very popular walks into the room and nobody knows them, then they can just walk through the room unimpeded, nobody interacts with them. That's a massless particle in this model, so a particle of light, like a photon. It goes through the universe, it goes past all the Higgs particles if you want, it goes through the Higgs field without talking to it, and it just goes through at the speed of light because it doesn't interact with anything. Then imagine something that's going to be massive, a heavy particle, represented by someone extremely popular, walks into the room. Then everybody wants to talk to them, everybody crowds around them, they interact with them, and they slow them down. So in this analogy, that's what mass is. Mass comes through the interaction of all the other particles with the Higgs particles, or the Higgs field in the universe. If that's true, then we have to discover these things, the Higgs particles at the LHC. If it's not true, then we have to see the mechanism that confers mass on things in the universe. It may be something we haven't thought of, certainly, but we know enough to know exactly where to look for that